Okay, so we're at the concluding paragraph of this essay, this mimer, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, on the mitzvah of Egla Arufa. And where we are is essentially that the uniqueness of the Egla Arufa, and that this calf is decapitated at a barren land.
If a body is found that nobody knows how,
it's an unresolved murder. An unresolved murder. Unresolved murder. Don't know where it came from. It's out in the field. They measure, describe, right? And essentially, what the Tzemach Tzedek explained is that the Egla Arufa is more similar to the goat that's cast away on Yom Kippur, as opposed to the ordinary offerings in the temple. The difference being, the offerings in the temple, the objective there is to take the blood, which represents life, passion, and drive, and offer that on the altar to elevate it to Hashem. So a person stumbled onto a sin accidentally, so their passion, their life, their drive drove them in a negative place. And the offering in the temple is to redirect that in a healthy place, redirect it toward Hashem, redirect it to the altar. And thus the blood has to be sprinkled and poured onto the altar. Whereas the Egla Arufa,
okay, go ahead.
Whereas the Egla Arufa is outside of the altar, outside of the temple. It's decapitated from the back of the neck rather than the front, like slaughtering. And likewise, the goat is cast away in a desert, a barren land. And the Egla Arufa also has to be done in a ground that was never plowed or never worked, never sown, never cultivated, indicating that here the objective is not to redirect towards godliness. On the contrary, we're casting away to wasteland. And the idea is that one has to acknowledge and give Klippa its due so that it doesn't encroach outside of its territory. So it's kind of like we're telling Klippa, we're telling the negative force, we know you exist, you belong there, stay out of our lives. That's the idea. If you deny its existence, it's going to gnaw at you. And that's what he describes here as there could be negative, negative decrees in heaven as a result of this Klippa if you don't acknowledge it and push it away.
But as opposed to the offering for atonement in the temple, which is for
unintentional.
There's most of it's kedushin and a little bit of negativity.
So if it's misdirect, a little bit of negativity gets
in the desert, it's all negativity.
That's right.
It was intentional.
It was intentional sin, but the people doing it didn't do it intentionally. If the murderer is found, he's put on trial. So it's because Jews are interconnected, so we're all responsible for one another. So we have to acknowledge that there's a negative and we're casting it away.
Yeah.
And that's how we fend off any negative decree that might come as a result of that negative behavior. That's the idea of the Egla Arufa. Is this audio working? Is it working? Test? Oh, there it is. Yes, it is working. Hope it is. Yeah.
So obviously murder is undoubtedly intentional.
That's right.
There's no if or and about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you find a murdered body, if a community finds a murdered body in the field, that nobody knows who it is, and who killed it, but it was obviously murder.
It's an unresolved murder,
Yeah.
So if the murderer is later found or found before, he's put on trial, because this Egla Arufa doesn't serve to atone for him.
No.
It only serves to ward off negative consequences that might come to the Jewish people as a whole because we're interconnected.
So the community.
Yeah. So it's appeasing the negative forces in the sense that we're acknowledging its existence and casting it to where it belongs, so it doesn't encroach on our territory.
But also perhaps that if it's a Jewish,
it is a Jewish body. Yeah.
Right. Then they're also giving it a decent burial.
Certainly, that's independent of the mitzvah of Egla Arufa. Yeah. And so this is similar to the goat that's cast away. That's also thrown off the back of the cliff, not like the Egla Arufa is the back of the neck. And it's away, it's not slaughtered properly or any blood offered on any altar, because it's not about elevating, it's about casting away. Giving it its due and casting it away.
Like an offering for the negative.
So you have to be careful when you use that language. But it could sound like that.
Yeah.
You got to be careful when you use that language. So that's right. We use the expression giving the devil its due, but it's not a Jewish expression. But it's kind of like acknowledging the existence of negativity, knowing that it exists, and pushing it in its corner.
Pushing the devil away also.
It's a way of acknowledge. That's right. It's not to deny its existence. If you deny its existence, it's just going to come gnawing at you your whole life. So you acknowledge its existence and say, you belong here, and that's the end of it. Now my life is here. Okay, so now we're going to come to the concluding paragraph, which is, it's a couple of lines. It's on the first page there, the second to last line, which is Va'od. Oh, and sorry, fourth to last line. The fourth word, the first page you have there. The fourth to last line, not in the note, but above the note, so above the line.
Okay.
Fourth to last line, the fourth word says ach. And now we're getting to the distinction between the goat that's cast away on Yom Kippur and the Egla Arufa. Two distinctions. That's what we're going to make note of in the concluding remarks. And then I hope to get into the footnote, because the footnote is going to address one missing piece, which is the paraduma, the red heifer. So you have the offerings in the temple, you have the castaways, the Egla Arufa and the goat that's thrown off the cliff, and then you have this paraduma, which is also slaughtered outside of the temple, but it's not chopped off from the back, it's slaughtered properly from the head, and you're actually facing the temple as you do that slaughtering. So it's kind of hybrid. It's outside, but it's facing towards the inn, and you actually sprinkle, right? You're supposed to sprinkle the blood facing toward the towards the temple.
That slaughtering is done outside the temple.
So that's right. The paraduma is done on a Mount of Olives, but facing so it's kind of hybrid, and there's a bridge. So you're sprinkling the blood towards the altar, but you're not in the altar. But you're not in the temple itself as the other kabbalah. So it's kind of hybrid, and that he's going to address in the footnotes. So I hope to get to that as well.
Okay.
That's the missing piece in this whole picture. Okay, so let's see. However, hine now, hasoyer hamishtaleyach, the goat that's cast away on Yom Kippur, haya nishlach was sent, hamidbara to the desert, b'chutz la'aretz. Good morning, we just got started. B'chutz la'aretz, outside of the land of Israel. It was cast away really out there. Shesham. Did I make a fourth copy? Oh no. Do you want to share?
Yeah.
Shesham were there in the desert, outside the land of Israel. Hu vadai moder haklipus. This is most definitely the realm of negative forces. It's out of Israel. It's a desert, barren land. But Ba'agola, the calf, is not so far out there. Was sent to a running river. So there is some life there. It's a running river. It's not a desert. Where they would find a space within the land of Israel itself. But there's a negative element. So there's an external force, but it still exists within Israel, which is interesting because he doesn't mention this here, but we learned that Yerushalayim is not part of this mitzvah. Right? The Egla doesn't happen in Yerushalayim, which would follow. Because Yerushalayim is really all holiness. And Eretz Yisrael, which is a degree lower of holiness, so they could find a place, as it were, that isn't cultivated. So it has some siphoning for negativity, but not as starkly negative or starkly klippa as outside of Israel, the desert. So it's a river, but it's uncultivated. It's in Israel, but it's somewhere not perfect. A place in which negative forces can siphon, but not as extreme as a desert.
Red heifer.
This is the Egla Arufa.
So in other words,
This is the Egla Arufa. The Egla Arufa is to be done at near a river on land that was uncultivated.
Okay.
So it's in Israel.
Yeah.
It's at a river, so it's not a desert.
Yeah. And it's not cultivated.
It's not cultivated. So it is lack of cultivation, as we explained yesterday, indicates klipa. Because kedusha, anything it takes, it gives out. So it's like a cultivated land. It takes life, but it produces. Whereas the uncultivated land is taking, but not giving anything out. So it's symbolic of klipa, of a negative energy that just siphons without producing anything of value. So the uncultivated river is not as extremely barren, as it were, as a desert. Right. So the castaway at Yom Kippur is a more extreme in where we're in the negative force than the Egla Arufa. That's the point he's making. It's outside of Israel and it's a desert, whereas this is inside of Israel and it's a river. So it's not as extreme. Okay.
But there's still a negative element.
There's still a negative element, which is why it's uncultivated, but it's not as extreme.
You were saying that Egla doesn't find Yerushalayim.
That's correct.
Unless the dead body is found in.
I don't think the mitzvah is done there. Right? Didn't we learn that in the Mishnah? Didn't we learn that in the Gemara? I think we did. I'm not mistaken. Okay, but that's one distinction. How extremely barren and distant is this space in which you're offering, or in which you're casting away this energy. Desert outside of Israel as the goat, or in Israel at a river but uncultivated as the Egla Arufa. So how extreme is the desolation of the negative energy that's siphoning? The second to last line, additionally.
So I have a shirt at 8:30. When do you finish?
Oh, closer to 9.
Huh?
Closer to 9.
Do you have to use that? I could use my phone. It's not as good. I want to record this.
If you record on your phone,
Huh?
does it record on your phone? Shit, I'm sorry. Okay, no. I fixed that. You actually ordered another computer, but it's not here yet. Okay. Right. Okay, but additionally, yesh hefresh, there's a distinction between sham lakan, between there, the goat that's cast away, lakan, to here, the Egla Arufa. Shasham over there, Hayasoyer was a goat. The kan over here, Egla, it's a calf. So what's the difference between goat and calf? Va'inyan, and the matter is, Shemepchina Soyer, from a goat, yesh la yenika gambit midis. A goat indicates a opening for the siphoning of negativity on a consistent basis. Gambit midis, also consistently. That's what it symbolizes. How does a goat symbolize that? Shalachain, therefore, I'm smiling because it's kind of funny. Its hair is long. Goat's got a long beard and long hair. Mm-hmm. Now here in Kabbalah is symbolic of energy that's siphoned through a filter. So it's used for a lot of different things, sometimes in the positive, sometimes in the negative, right? Because here, the hair is a living entity. But for somehow, it's not as living as its source. Right? So the source of life in my finger is actually my heart and head. If I were to, God forbid, cut my finger, it hurts very badly. Now, the hair also gets its life source from the head and the heart, from the same blood that pumps through my body. Mm. And while it's connected, if I pulled it, it would hurt. But if I cut it, it doesn't hurt. And the same thing with nails. It's a similar thing. So nails and hair often symbolize siphoning of energy from a source that's connected, but not somewhat detached, not completely one with the source from which it derives that energy. Mm. So in this context, it's symbolic of negative energy that siphons from Kedusha, but isn't connected to Kedusha. It siphons from holiness because all life comes from Hashem's holiness. There's no other source of life, as we explained in previous classes. But at the same time, it's not connected to Kedusha. It remains independent. So the fact that the goat has long hair indicates consistent flow of energy to negative space. And therefore, it's cast away to that far off, desolate land way out there. There's this consistent negative force.
Right. Also, these goats as the sin offering.
Yes, that's correct. That's right. Now, umin, on top of the next page, min hasidus, and through the means of the hair, umekabel yenika, the negative forces receives its siphoning of energy. So now, okay, so there's the two distinctions. Now here's something else interesting. The Egla Arufa atones for a murder. Right. And the goat offering atones for all intentional sins, not just murder. So it isn't necessarily as extreme. So it's interesting. On one hand, the cast away goat is consistent flow of energy to negative force.
Of all kinds.
Of all kinds. On the other hand, it might not be so extreme. Whereas the negative force that's being drawn by the Egla Arufa is not consistent. But when it is, it's a punctuation that's very, very deep. So it's in Eretz Yisrael, but it's some sort of like a hole that happened. There's a gaping hole. All of a sudden, like something negative happened in a place of holiness. What's going on? Why did a murder happen in Eretz Yisrael? Sometimes if like there's murder rampantly, and it's a consistent flow of energy into a negative space called murder in Eretz Yisrael. It happens every now and again, but when it does, it's a really bad thing. And therefore, it doesn't have a goat, which symbolizes consistent flow of negative energy as per the hair. But what's offered is an animal of higher quality than the goat. the calf. That's what he's about to say. Now, for other sins, excluding murder, it was enough. Also from a flow of this kind of the goat, which isn't so, it's consistent, but not so bold. Because these sins are not as extreme as murder, right? It's less extreme. The plus and the minus is the same thing. Something that's less extreme ends up being more consistent. Something that's more extreme is less consistent. So it's like quality versus quantity. The quantity of sin is greater when you're talking about less qualitatively extreme sins. Whereas murder, which is less common, is qualitatively a worse sin. Therefore, you have a goat, which is consistently flowing negative energy, but not as extreme as a calf. Yeah. But when it comes to murder, Egla, they had to bring Agola, a calf, which is Pnei Shor, the face of the ox, Masmor, that's on the left side. He's referring to Yecheskel's vision.
Yeah.
Right? Yecheskel's vision of the chariot, which is like a window into the heavenly spheres. So lots of Kabbalah, which talk about the heavenly spheres, is built around this description of the chariot that Yecheskel sees. That's right. And the chariot has 4 sides. Eagle, ox, human, what am I missing? And Aryeh, a lion. Yeah. Now, each of these sides represent a different mode of behavior, right? Which can either be in the positive or the negative. Now, the calf is symbolic of the energy represented by the ox, which the ox, as you would imagine, represents full force passion, the ultimate passion. And thus, it's loftier than a goat, which is just a hyper animal that doesn't have the kind of energy that an ox does. And therefore, specifically with their calf, this would hold avora arvis, this would help to ward off negative decree that might come as a result of the fact that Jews are interconnected, and in their interconnected existence, there was a punctuation of a crazy act of murder. And he concludes, and let this atone for all the Jewish people. So this concludes his commentary on the Egla Arufa and the Sari Mashaleach in comparison to that. Now let's go to the note on the previous page, which, as I mentioned, he's going to describe the paradum. I hope to finish it today.
I was going to ask about the paradum.
Right, because that's the missing piece here. We went to 2 extremes. We for comparative sake, we went to 2 extremes. Offerings that are inside the temple, where the blood is offered on the altar, where you're slaughtering from the front. So it's like a wholesome face-to-face activity in which you're trying to realign energy. And then you have the Egla Arufa and the Sari Mishtalech, which is the exact opposite. It's from the backside. It's cast away. You're throwing it to negative, saying, you stay away from us. I'm not trying to realign anything. So there's no elevation here. It's to cast away. It's the reverse.
An acknowledgement.
It's an acknowledgement of what is and saying, go away.
I just want to step back, comparing the calf and the goat.
Yeah.
I would think that it would be the opposite, where it would be the calf that would be sent off the cliff, because we're dealing with intentional sins, whereas in the
Egla Arufa is also intentional
it's
sin.
intentional, but it's really meant for the people, for the populace, because you said
So is the castaway goat meant for the populace. So let's just
right. But if the murder were to be found, he would have a separate.
So the individual
for that in and of itself.
The individual
is really about the populace, and they're not the ones who committed.
So he mentioned in the parentheses the same thing is true of the castaway goat. There's an individual who did an intentional sin. The castaway goat isn't good enough unless he does teshuvah.
Right.
So same thing with the Egla Arufa. So that's why he mentions that in the parentheses. Yeah, that the teshuvah atones for that individual who might have done an intentional sin, and the castaway is just for the populace to not suffer as a result of someone's negative behavior. He puts that in the parentheses because otherwise, it's not as if after Yom Kippur, if all trials for people who done intentional sin are off the table because hey, look, we had the castaway. So in that sense, it's similar to the Egla Arufa. Okay. So now let's look at the Parah Aduma. Because the Parah Aduma, the red heifer, is in between situation. It's outside of the temple, right? The procedure is it's taken across a bridge from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives. And over there, it's slaughtered, not from the back, but from the front. And the cow is facing the temple. The blood is sprinkled facing toward the temple, not in the temple, but toward it.
Right?
It's in Yerushalayim. It's facing toward the temple, but not in the temple. So it's a kind of hybrid between these things. What does it atone for? It atones for interaction with impurity that comes as a result of interaction with a corpse,
Right.
which is the highest degree of impurity. Right? All impurity is a kind of death, right? Which is what klipa is. Klipa is in essence a death, because as we described it as like a parasite, right? It siphons off holy energy, siphons off healthy energy to its own detriment, because as soon as the parasite eats up all the energy that's healthy, it dies too, because inherently it's a death. In other words, inherently it's a detachment from life. But even a detachment from life can only exist if it siphons off life.
It's like a vine.
That's right.
No, it's
Rob
like
the tree
that's a parasite. Parasite just eats endlessly.
Another example that we gave yesterday from Rabbi Steinsaltz is a black market. A black market only exists if there's a healthy market. But if the black market were to consume the entire healthy market, it itself would die too.
That happens over.
And it's a dead and it's dead. It's dying. Exactly. Well, see, okay, I don't know. I don't know the geopolitics, but I imagine a lot of the black market there siphons off the healthy economy of the rest of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there you go. A black market can only siphon off an actual market.
Fine.
Otherwise, it can't exist. So all negative force, even if it inherently is anti-life, will only siphon off healthy life. And that's klipa here. Klipa only exists in this world through a flow of kedusha. But in so doing, it's its own detriment, its own death. The pasuk is Shashala to Adam ba'Adam l'ra loy. Man controls a man to his own detriment. That's the pasuk Chassidus quotes to indicate this idea. Now, death, therefore, is the highest form of impurity. And this Parah Aduma, which is outside the temple but facing the temple, so it's kind of hybrid there. I really hope this audio is working. Is it working? It is. I don't know if it's on the whole time. So this death is atoned by Parah Aduma, which is hybrid. So what's the story here? And that's going to be the footnote. Okay, so Haga, which means footnote, in the bottom, below the line. We might start it today and we'll conclude it on Monday. That's which we learn in chapter 1 of Tractate Chulin, which says that kosher bepara, that which is kosher for the Parah Aduma, the red heifer, posel be'egla, ba'agala is forbidden, is invalid when it comes to the Egla Arufa. That's the Mishnah. What does that mean? Upirish Vaja Bartanura, the classic commentary on the Mishnah, Rabbi Varda Bartanura explains, Parah Aduma, the red heifer, the Egla Arufa, and the decapitated calf, Shneim Nasim Bachutz. They are both, the procedures are both outside of the temple. Ella Bat, Shapara Aduma, the red heifer, Bishchita, is through proper slaughtering, Sheda, it is valid.
Because it's
under the neck, in the face of the neck. But Barifa, if you were to decapitate it from the back, Psula would be invalid. And Egla Arufa is the reverse. Barifa, with decapitation from the back, Sheda, it's valid. Bishchita, if you were to slaughter it from the front, Psula, it's invalid. Nimsa, the result is, HaKosher b'Parah, that which is kosher and valid by the Parah Aduma to slaughter from the front, Posel is invalid, Be'agala, if you were to slaughter from the front by the Egla Arufa. Va'kosher ba'agala, and that which is valid by the Agala to decapitate from the back, Posel is invalid b'Parah for the red heifer. And commentary from the Mishnah as explained by Rabbi Vaja Bartanura. So we see this opposite nature, but some similarity that they're both done outside the temple itself. So now let's explain this. And the matter is, Kiapara, the calf, the red heifer, chatas kairi rachmana. The Torah refers to it as a sin offering, which means it has some element of atonement. So it isn't exactly like the Egla Arufa or the castaway goat, the Shar Mashtaleach, which is being sent off completely. And there's no elevation involved in that. The Paraduma has some elevation, which is why the Torah refers to it as a chatas, as a sin offering, linking it to the sin offerings in the temple itself. As he explains, Lafi, this is because Shayadeya Efer, through the ashes, Huprinas Hala Asman, there's an elevation of that which is in negative space. The Kiddush Mechatas, and the process of adding water to the mixture of the ashes, right? You have to have a special water called Kiddush. It's a special holy water that was never used. A lot of details about that water. And then on top of that, you put the ashes. So the ashes, these are two elements. The ashes is elevation from below, and the water represents to draw down holiness from above in response. So the Kiddush Mechatas, the waters of the Paraduma, who Amshachas Mad, is to draw upon divine energy from above. Now this idea of offering below to above, and in response there's a drawing down from above to below, is Kibachala Karbonis. This is parallel to every other offering in the temple. Hakrevim Bifnim, which is offered within the temple walls, Shehem Lekapara, which come to atone. You elevate the blood, and in response there's a fire from heaven that consumes. Right? So there's a correlation here. There's a relationship in which we dedicate our lives to Hashem in the offering on the temple, and Hashem responds by welcoming us in. And the same thing is true in the Paraduma. There's an elevation from below in the ashes and a drawing down from above in the water. And moreover, Malasa, the virtue of the Paraduma, Gedoyla Yoser, is in some ways even greater than the offerings that are in the temple. And now he gives the geography, the Kabbalistic geography, of what level of Hashem is drawn down in response to the Paraduma versus what level of divine energy is drawn down in response to a carbon. And the level of divine energy drawn down in response to the Paraduma is of a greater level than that which is drawn down in response to the carbon. I'm going to translate the words, but essentially what he's referring to is that there are two levels of divine compassion or kindness. One is divine compassion that's part of the system. Hashem has a system in which he manifests his energy into this world. And the system is comprised of 10 spheres, 10 attributes: wisdom, understanding, knowledge, kindness, discipline, compassion, and so on and so forth. So that level of kindness or compassion is relative to, and what's the right word? Something that's makbil in Hebrew, something that's corresponding to the system in which it is flowing. So in other words, it's a measure for measure type thing. I invest so much, in response, Hashem gives me an equal measure. So in the carbon, I dedicate my life back to Hashem, so Hashem re-invites me. Right? And that is only possible if the place from which you are returning to Hashem is not such that you're completely cut out. But if you're completely cut out, the system says, I'm sorry, you're gone. Like an intentional sin. And thus, the offerings in the temple only atone for accidental sins. You accidentally fell on the wayside, no problem. You didn't cut yourself out. You tripped up and fell over something. Okay, so reinvest and we'll welcome you back. Measure for measure. The system allows for this. But then there is a kindness of Hashem that's transcendent. This is the 13 attributes of divine mercy. The 13 attributes of divine mercy is divine compassion that transcends the system. We've explained this in the past, and we talked about the idea of teshuvah, and we used Rabbi Steinsaltz's example of a father and son playing chess. Right? So when a father and son are playing chess, the rules are the rules. And if the kid messes up, you lose. That's just you can't take backs. So if the kid goes to the father and says, Dad, can I take back the last 3 moves? I realize I made a mistake. We're playing an honest game. That's not how it works. But what if the child says, Dad, I know I made a mistake. I know I've lost this game. Can we start the game over again? So now, what's he appealing to? He's not appealing to the game to be changed. He's appealing to the author of the game, the one with whom he's playing, and saying, let's start over again. So he's going outside of the system of the game, addressing the source of the game, and saying, let's start again. That's to reach to the transcendent compassion. And that's really what teshuvah is. Teshuvah is not only at the lower level. The teshuvah is, okay, I went this way, I gotta, make new moves to come back in. That's the carbon. But real teshuvah is to turn to Hashem and say, I know I lost this game. Can we start again? And Hashem says, yeah, for sure, because all I want to do was hang out with you to begin with. So let's start over. The system says not to, so what? We're resetting the system.
And you also learn from that.
And you can learn from that too. But what you're touching here is the author of the system. You're touching the transcendent. You're talking to Hashem himself and says, look, I know I lost the game. Let's start over.
That's the pivot moment, right? Acknowledging the error.
Correct.
The takebacks is not acknowledging
no. That's correct.
I want another pass. I want to be
That's
excused.
Right. Acknowledging that you lost the game. Now let's start over. Now, as we're going to learn on Monday, the level of compassion that the Parah Adumah reaches is this level of divine transcendence. And therefore, it atones for the absolute lowest level of Tumah, death. Death itself is atoned in this lofty level of Parah Adumah. And that's why, as we're going to learn, it's outside of the temple. Because the elevation here is of such a low state that it's even outside the temple. But it's an elevation, and thus it faces the altar. The carbon, the Egla, Arufa, and the Sotah is not an elevation, it's a castaway. The Parah Adumah is an elevation, but an elevation from what? From the outside. It's an elevation from the lowest space, and therefore it faces the altar, it faces the temple, indicating elevation. It's slaughtered from the front, indicating elevation. But that elevation comes from the absolute lowest place, from the worst screw-up possible, death itself. This is what we're going to learn, God willing, on Monday, and giving us 3 types of offerings: the castaways, the offering of the Parah Adumah, and the offering of the temple, which will be summarized, God willing, and given more detail on Monday. Wonderful day and good never Shabbos even.